Why I always end with yeah? I need like another like another catchphrasey thing.
All right, today we're going to talk about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. We mentioned it in our last episode, so I think this is a nice segue. Or that was a nice segue into this episode.
I'm excited for a couple of reasons for this episode. One, starting a podcast, as silly as it sounds, one episode a week, a lot harder than, you think it is. Like,
it comes fast.
I know it seems silly where it's like, oh, like, just go record. It's hard to find topics and turn it on. Like, it's like there's so much to talk about, but in the midst of just a crazy week, like, it's humbling. And I like having the side project, but yeah.
Shout out to, I was going to say, all creators.
It's incredible.
This has been the most humbling experience. You know, when you're a teenager and you should work behind a counter as a hostess so that you understand what it's like when you are a diner.
Yes.
Same thing.
It feels very similar. So shout out to those folks. The other reason why. So I know some people, if you're listening, you're listening. If you're watching on video, hello. We are both sitting here with copies of an executive order.
Never in my life.
This is where the weird part about Bitcoin, where it's like the curiosity mindset. And in our lives, we have never read an executive order, let alone printed an executive order to study and to converse about it, which you just kind of like go like, whoa, okay, that's kind of neat.
That is neat. And I pictured it being like 150 pages. It's not even three pages. It's two and a signature. 2 and a bit
kind of thing,
which was kind of cool.
I think it's
pretty
unique.
Understood most of it.
Well, I was surprised by that as well. The language is very simple, and maybe that's by design, but
maybe
we read an executive order.
We did
for this, which is just kind of cool. But what are we talking about? Sorry, you intro.
I was thinking about how do we want to go about this, and since you and I try and take what we say seriously, meaning we don't want to spread extra rumors or make assumptions. I say we start at the top and kind of work our way through the actual document. Do you like that plan?
Well, I like that plan because there are some pivotal things. But why are we talking about this? I think even starting just at a higher level.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, I'll say this. From my side, why I felt for whatever episode we're on, 6, I think 6, why this was relevant and worth a conversation is of the times, right? It's kind of unique and not just March, but 2025 for this like fairly large piece of, I won't call it legislation, but pretty big piece of, I don't know, government documentation kind of down. So it felt relevant to discuss. And for those curious about Bitcoin, new to the space, at least from my point of view, this would hopefully create quite a bit of confidence that we are not just, sitting here with our tinfoil hats talking about I don't know, random conspiracies. Like it's created some relevance outside of even just pop culture. And I think if you are new and you're still considering thinking about Bitcoin, investing in Bitcoin, this is a pretty good positive green light around it. So those are the reasons I wanted to talk about it.
I think for me, I was thinking about when we were driving in the car, when we heard this kind of was approved or executive ordered.
Yes.
And there was kind of like a ripple, like a wave. Because at first you're like, I think I read that he's done like 97 executive orders.
Many.
Don't take that for verbatim. That may have grown since I read this. This was on, doesn't matter, March 11th, I think. And it kind of like hit me in waves because it was like, oh, interesting. And I didn't really know much about it. And then we started to really think about like, what does this mean? And we heard a quote that was actually super cool in the podcast we were listening to. And it's like, if the 800-pound gorilla makes a move, you have to respond. The gorilla in this situation being the U.S. government. So it was kind of like, wow, this is like a global ripple effect and a really big statement. And then it kind of started to hit me of like, wow, this is kind of the start of the next chapter. That's like the sequel,
I think so. I think so too. And I mean, literally, so to your point on the date, Executive Order 14233 of March 6th, 2025.
March 6th.
So like 3 weeks ago, roughly, this was signed. And we've been listening to a couple of podcasts on it. Again, for those who maybe you don't live in the United States, if you are listening, hello, international listeners.
Wow. Wow.
We're talking about an executive order, which while you and I are not political experts by any
Not
means,
at all.
when a new president comes in, and you don't have to be new, it's any time during your term, executive orders are essentially presidential documents that are specific and strategic actions that the president says, like, go do these things, sort of thing. And they're not limited to just monetary policy. You can have executive orders of all sorts of things. You can have clemency from prison time. You can have, go do these things, special people. Like, it's basically just like you now must go listen to my order and kind of to go do these things. And so the reason I feel like it's relevant to bring that up is, again, in our not political prowess, I would be hesitant to call this like legislation, only because it's just the president who sat with the document and signed something. Like, Congress hasn't looked at anything, the Senate hasn't looked at anything. It's like, it's kind of like we've kicked off the race of something pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some pretty big players in this that now have to go do things as a result of this executive order.
Right.
But it's the first time the United States government has very specifically kind of like looked at Bitcoin and said, you are strategic, so much so that we need to create a reserve around you. So it's a pretty big tip of the hat towards this thing, giving it relevance in terms of as a monetary asset, which I think is pretty crazy.
I'm going to pause you there because I like to look up like even the simplest phrases.
Mm-hmm.
I looked up a lot of simple phrases or new words, and even like, what does the Treasury Secretary
Mm-hmm.
do? But a strategic asset,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't say I could define that, so I looked it up. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, strategic asset being something that is more of a long-term asset to help achieve big picture goals. So I saw an analogy of like the strategic asset to a castle is a moat because it's long-term protection of the castle, and that's the goal of the castle. But that it seemed obvious, but I was like, what is a strategic asset? And it's kind of like something that is more of a big picture.
I like the moat reference. I think if you almost thought of a government as like a company,
Mm-hmm.
it's any resource that company needs to survive and thrive. So if you're the United States, examples of strategic assets would be oil,
Minerals.
key minerals, lithium, copper, different things that we need to like make the things that we need to make and ensure that the world, or at least our world, keeps running.
I mean, so then if you put if you take that notion and you say that the U.S. government just declared Bitcoin as a strategic asset, and you compare it to those list items, it's a pretty big deal.
It's a pretty big deal. That's the part. And I also like your reference of it being like this like ripple effect where for those, if you are visual animals, if you can picture yourself like taking, a big old stone and like dropping it into the lake, I think the stone has officially like been cast. It has hit the water, and it's like that first wave is like just starting to crest. So we don't necessarily know where the ripples are going to go or what it means, but like the stone has hit the water, and it's exciting. It's exciting, and it's relevant, oddly, to the podcast. Like this could have been months in the making, years in the making.
It's like our first current event.
It could have never really happened. It really could have. So for those reasons, worth talking about, which is kind of neat. But so you went on a mission today and looked through. You were on a highlighting spree through the executive order.
Okay, technically, I only highlighted like 4 things.
Oh, where do you?
But
think
check
we
it out.
should
I
start?
made notes.
All the good notes.
I read it. I printed it. PDF. You can go online and print it. PDF.gov. Just kidding. I don't know the website. But yes, I think we start by, you and I both read through it.
Yes.
So I think we can summarize as we go down, but I think we start top down. Looks like you have highlights at the top. So
I do have highlights at the top.
You go first.
Okay, so here's my biggest takeaway for any of you that are not reading the executive order. First thing, our last episode with Bitcoin versus altcoins, and our number 1 takeaway from that was Bitcoin is different from altcoins. Just by the title of this thing, the U.S. government agrees. Like the fact that there is both a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a separate digital asset stockpile. Great branding, by the way, whoever thought of that.
2 buckets.
the U.S. government agrees on 2 different buckets. And I think that's just the first biggest light bulb right there, which this is, it's no longer your opinion or my opinion or the opinion of the market. The U.S. government says these 2 things are different and we need to treat them differently. And there's aspects of the executive order as to like why they talk about that. But that was the first thing that stuck out in the literal title of the document. When you get into it, the next thing I said as like the best part of section 1 is they get it. Like the government inside just a few sentences highlighted arguably some of the most critical pieces of Bitcoin, which for whoever drafted this, it just proves that they finally at least understand some of the aspects of sound money and why they are significant. So I'm just gonna read like those pieces.
Not to like belittle anyone. I just think it's so cute.
Why?
Like I just thought it was when I read it and I printed it, I'm like, this is so cute. It's so cute because it's like, here's what it is. I like that they gave you like, it literally says section 1 in italics background. And I just like, wasn't that nice?
So this
so
is
you can read it
this
now.
is in the opening of this thing. It says the Bitcoin protocol permanently caps the total supply of Bitcoin BTC at 21 million coins and has never been hacked. Now that's like virtually like the fact that that's where they started. Like it's like they already understand that to be significant, that the total supply is fixed.
I love that they cracked the whip and said it's never been hacked.
Never been hacked.
Because that like shuts down in the first sentence. That shuts down so many so much noise.
As a result of its scarcity and security, Bitcoin is referred to as digital gold. Because there is a fixed supply of BTC, there is a strategic advantage to being among the first nations to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Boom.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Basically, they want to implement a policy to maximize BTC's strategic position as a unique store of value in the global financial system. Like just in those few sentences,
It's a really big deal.
They understand the supply cap. They understand that it's secure. They see it as digital gold. They know that they got to be the front runner, aka the 800-pound gorilla of establishing a strategic reserve, and that it's a unique store of value. Like they get it. That's what I took away.
Kudos to whoever summarized this because that took us 3 hours on
That's a good point.
live conversation,
You're
and
right.
they did it in 5 sentences.
We should have just read the executive order, and it probably would have been a little bit easier.
So
You're right.
we
When in
owe
doubt,
someone who watched episode 3.
Don't listen to our podcast.
Back.
Just go read the executive order, and they'd be like, "Yep, okay, that makes a lot of sense."
I thought they did a very, very good job.
But that was the headline for me. It was like right there, section 1, the government gets it, or at least whoever wrote this gets it, which is pretty great.
I love this part. This is also in section 1. Our nation must harness, not limit, the power of digital assets for our prosperity. What a wonderful line.
Wonderful little line.
But that kind of drives home what you were just talking about of what a strategic asset is.
Yes. So that was my first part.
Cool.
Now I'll go where did you highlight next?
Let's see. So I really, off the bat, I was in the same spot. I really liked how, like I said, I thought it was just like so cute because it was so simple and it was just so nice. So I liked that. Then section 2, I'm trying to think. The policy, it goes into policy. It's really short, so I'm going to read it. It is the policy of the United States to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It is further the policy of the United States to establish a United States digital asset stockpile that can serve as a secure account for orderly and strategic management of the United States and other digital asset holdings. So same thing as kind of the title. It's just declaring that there's going to be a policy for both strategic Bitcoin reserve and for digital asset stockpile.
I think the reason this is really interesting, and for those who may not be involved in Bitcoin social in any way, shape, or form, this was in some ways surprising. And actually, again, I even fell prey to this in the early days, like the day or two after this was signed. The Bitcoin world kind of lost its cookies in the first 72 hours because, in the absence of actually reading the executive order, everyone had responded to this particular like news clip of, I don't know if Trump actually said it or if I think it was a post on Twitter where he was like, oh yes, we're going to have a strategic stockpile of XRP and Cardano and these other coins. And Bitcoin universe lost its mind.
Because they're like, you sold us on false promises.
Basically, it was like, how on God's green, how could you possibly call those things strategic assets?
Right.
And so, equally humbled by the notion of like, wait, before we respond to the news clip or the soundbite, like go read the thing and see what happens. And so, I think in a weird way, I'll even call this genius, like by the U.S. government. I think there was probably a moment where it's like, all right, we know Bitcoin is the real deal, and we know that that one needs to be the thing that we focus on. Like that is the strategic reserve asset that we're referring to here. But there are other digital assets out there, inclusive of other coins, NFTs, like things of that nature, where they're like, I guess we kind of got to recognize those too, but in a less significant way. So genius in the sense that they were somehow able to address both in the executive order, but give dominance to Bitcoin. So it's kind of like no one really needs to get upset about anything. And after you read the order, I thought that was genius by whoever wrote the thing.
I agree with the language. I do want to make sure it's clear that they included it because they already had some.
Yes.
So it was kind of like all right, we're not just going to do a fire sale immediately of all the other things existing, but
right.
I just want to make sure like they didn't go out and be like, hey, we're also going to put some of this in here and that looks cool. It was like, hey, we already have all these other things. Let's include them in the bill or the executive order.
So that's a really good point. And I guess we're kind of, I'll say we're paraphrasing the next section. So this would be Section 3, Part A and Section 3, Part B. And basically what this says is, look, we're going to establish both a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a United States digital asset stockpile, so non-Bitcoin oriented things. But the key things is, per this executive order, most of this is just about like gathering what the government already has. Now, the part that's interesting is like, from your and I's seat, we don't know where this exists in the government. It's kind of like we have an idea, like this is my idea. If I am the Department of Justice and maybe I have arrested criminals and seized their assets.
I looked this up.
Did you?
I did.
What did you find?
Okay, so two things before we even get to that,
Yeah.
because that was interesting to me. One, the Secretary of the Treasury shall establish an office to administer and maintain control of custodial accounts. So I looked up, I'll admit, I didn't know what the Treasury Secretary actually did. And I liked that somebody wrote that they are basically the chief financial officer of the government. So if the president is the CEO, they are the CFO. They are in charge of basically
Fiscal policy, monetary policy, all those things.
Exactly, making sure the finances are in order. So that made sense that it would fall under the Treasury Secretary. Sure. The Commerce Secretary is also mentioned in this. I didn't know what they did. And their focus is on business growth, business development, and prosperity of businesses in the United States and within businesses in the government. That's probably not right. So anyway, I looked up those two things. I thought that was important since they are basically in charge of this group. But it states that the Secretary of the Treasury shall establish an office. So they're basically creating a new group of people to manage this.
Yes.
The part that before we go back into the where does this all come from, the part that blew my mind is like, we're in jobs. I mean, I'm freelance job, you're in real job.
We're in jobs.
And I'm thinking about like the complicated nature of like cold storage.
Yes.
Where are all these assets?
Yes.
They gave them 30 days.
I know.
30 days. I'm sure someone woke up, went in the office, like, guess what? You're part of this new group, and we need to go find all
Go watch all the YouTube videos you can on crypto.
The Bitcoin and digital assets in the entire government in 30 days. Rough day to walk into the office, in my opinion. That seems fast and impressive. So, you're a few days in. I hope it's going well.
I'm picturing
that is like terrifying.
I'm picturing Greg from Succession and getting this order from the higher ups. He's like, okay, so like any guidance as to how to do it? And they're like, figure it out. And they're like, sure, let me just go figure out how to figure out how much BTC the government has and where it is, and do the people even know what they have? Like,
Wow.
Yeah.
That was, and I'm sure with all the other executive orders, I'm sure they also all have like 30-day timestamps. So, oh, I hope you're all getting some sleep because that sounds stressful.
It is a little stressful.
But back to, so that kind of leads into like, if they're going to go collecting, where did this come from? And I
Yes.
looked it up. Because the collection and the group is set out to go find things that already exist. They exist because they were confiscated through criminality or they say forfeiture. Or seizure. Hard to get those words out clearly.
Forfeiture.
Yeah. So interesting. Bitfinex and Silk Road and some smaller stuff. That was a huge part of the Bitcoin that already exists in the government. So it's interesting because there's estimated to be about 200,000 Bitcoin in the government. That actually, no, is quite large. And I didn't know if that included or excluded Bitfinex, the returning of those stolen assets to the holders. Right. And it actually excludes it. So I think there's 97,000 Bitfinex confiscated coins in the government stockpile right now, but those are intended to be given back. Wow. So the 200,000 coins that exist, rumored, they don't know yet, in 30, now 20
we'll
something
figure it
days.
out, yeah. Greg's on it.
But that was way more than I thought.
Yes.
So those are the numbers that I found online.
But I think for reference.
But they come from bad people. No, I'm just kidding.
They come from bad people. Well, regardless of your feelings, listeners' feelings on seizure, forfeiture, I think the main thing to take away there is, what we've been talking about in terms of fiscal policy and the Fed and the ability to just like turn on the printer. I think the main takeaway is the government didn't write an executive order that said, go print $100 billion and go buy a bunch of Bitcoin. Like, we didn't inflate USD to go buy another asset. This was more of a like, look, we know we have some. We first have to take stock of what already exists and kind of, figure it out and put it in two different buckets. So that was my biggest like, woof, like sweat off the brow kind of moment on this, where we're not going to go try and haphazardly run and try and chase these new things.
I agree. Let's see. What else came up in those lines? I just don't want to get ahead of myself. Within 30 days of this order, they shall submit a report. Bless the person who has to write the report.
So Section 3 basically is like, hey, look, we're creating this thing, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and United States Digital Asset Stockpile. There is a little bit of difference. There's like Section 3 Part A, which is about the Bitcoin side, and Section 3 Part B, digital asset side. Yeah. There was a slight difference in the paragraphs.
There were?
Yes. So for the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, towards the bottom, it says government BTC deposited into the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve shall not be sold and shall be maintained as reserve assets of the United States, utilized to meet government objectives in accordance with applicable law. That's pretty big, because inside of this executive order, in addition to saying we're going to make this thing, they're already stipulating we're not going to sell it.
Which I learned is until now, the government would auction it off.
How so?
So if they seized Bitcoin, but until now there's been no system in place to account for it, store it, decide what to do with it. It's really been the Wild West, per what I've read. And it until recently, if they had Bitcoin or someone grabbed Bitcoin in the government, what they would do is to make money from it, is that they would auction it off.
Sorry. So to go back, you meant that before this executive order, if they had Bitcoin in wherever they were, they'd auction the thing off and AKA sell it.
Yeah.
And in this case, this is now basically putting a stop on that, where it's like, nope, like hold still on it.
So it was interesting of like, because they didn't know what it was really, and no one was paying attention or keeping stock or storing it or making an account of what they had, they would auction it off. And I believe the losses, or the gains that weren't made because they gave away the Bitcoin
In the billions.
was in the billions.
Okay, no big deal. That's a bummer. So
So
again,
it was
poor
like,
Greg,
oh,
who pushed
learning hurts.
learning hurts.
Learning hurts.
Okay, but that's for the strategic Bitcoin reserve paragraph. When you then get into section 3, part B, on the digital asset stockpile towards the bottom, it says the Secretary of the Treasury shall determine strategies for responsible stewardship of the United States digital asset stockpile in accordance with applicable law. Doesn't say don't sell.
Yeah.
So that's kind of unique.
It is.
So who knows what the Secretary of the Treasury will ultimately decide to do for that. Maybe it's sell digital assets to fund Bitcoin or to fund other things, but a little bit more leeway with the digital assets comparatively, which I thought was unique. Okay, so then we get into section 3, part C. And this is where your buddy, the Secretary of Commerce, comes in, because thus far, only person or steward mentioned is Secretary of the Treasury. So
And Greg.
this is where, and Greg. Okay, so they right at the top of this document, I'm like, hell yeah, they get it. The government gets it. They put in the most or some of the most important aspects of Bitcoin and stewardship.
I thought C was really important.
This is why I like it, and
Me
my like headline was fiscally responsible.
Incredible.
The Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce, buddies, are going to work together. They're going to develop strategies for acquiring additional government Bitcoin, provided that such strategies are budget neutral and do not impose incremental costs on United States taxpayers. What? So they're like, look, we're going to be smart about this.
So normal.
Okay, to your
I couldn't
point,
believe it.
CFO, buddy, Secretary of the Treasury, and Secretary of Commerce, the person in charge of growth,
Yeah.
they're going to get together. And they're going to be like, look, this BTC thing is pretty dang important. And so we're going to develop strategies to potentially get more. But to do so, it's either got to be budget neutral, and it's not going to cost the taxpayer anything more. What? Like,
do you want to try and just make sure budget neutral makes sense?
What do you think it means?
I looked up kind of an equation. So let's say that the government wants to propose a $10 million tax cut.
Right.
In order to do that, they can't just, wait, let me visualize it in my head. $10 million tax cut. They have to remove that $10 million from somewhere else in the budget so that the budget is balanced.
Yes. So if the government says we're gonna cut the taxes, right? So like we are not going to make as much money as we were going to beforehand. They have to ensure that there wasn't another bill that was like, oh, Sheboygan, we said no to tax dollars, but how the heck are we going to make that bill happen? So ideally what they would do first is they would cut their spending. Right. They would say, hey, let's look at superfluous spend. Let's cut $10,000 worth of spend, which means we can go back to the taxpayer and say, we can cut taxes by $10,000 because we don't need that $10,000 to fund the thing that we just got rid of. Neutrality across the board.
This raises an interesting point because like we always try and be objective. I could see the fiscally responsible section.
Okay.
I could see the fear that could arise if you read that and understood what you just said of like, oh, does that mean that, if they want to buy more Bitcoin, what are they going to cut? Or what are they not going to spend money on? I could see that. Like if you were like, meh.
So, okay, let's play that out. So what are they going to cut? So the things that most people would be afraid of cutting would be Social Security, Medicare, who knows, even military spending, things like that. Like really, really, really important entitlements, we'll call them. You can't touch those with a 10-foot pole. If you cut spending on any of those things, like the taxpayer is gonna like pitchforks kind of thing.
Rah, 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 rah.
Rah, 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 rah. So you're right. There could be some programs that would compete in a way, but again, the phrasing of budget neutral
means
nice. It can't be net, but it can't be new. So that's the part. It would almost be more along the lines of, I don't know, I'm making this up a little bit. We were going to spend $100,000 on, I don't know, new signage. we don't need new signage, but it's already baked into the budget, so we're going to spend $100,000 on Bitcoin.
Aha.
Budget neutrality.
There you go.
Isn't this great when we tell people like we are not financial experts? And they're like, this is why people get hung up on some words sometimes. Budget neutral. But TLDR means that we can't add spend to our docket in order to buy more.
And I know I get hung up on words. You are really good at the high level. But I will fight, and it's important because it's more just creating a habit of being okay saying, I don't know this.
Yes.
And hopefully others are feel like they can raise their hand and say, I don't know that either.
Yeah.
Budget neutral sounds like really basic, but guess what? It's not. And yes, sometimes, well, it is, but then we go down rabbit holes and I'm okay with that.
Okay. So to put a stamp on it from budget neutral, I asked ChatGPT, what would be an example of a budget neutral decision in the government? A budget neutral decision in government refers to a policy change or action that does not increase overall government spending or reduce overall revenue. The net impact on the budget is zero. Example, reallocating funds within a department. Let's say a government agency, like the Department of Transportation, wants to increase funding for road safety programs. Instead of requesting additional funds, they reduce the budget for a lower priority initiative, such as landscaping highway medians, and redirect that money to road safety. Outcome, no new spending added to the budget. Funding is shifted from one program to another. Net budget impact, zero.
That makes sense.
Budget neutral. So that's how, if they're going to get any more Bitcoin, it's got to be budget neutral, and it cannot impose incremental costs on the U.S. taxpayer. It does go on to say, however, the United States government shall not acquire additional stockpile assets other than in connection with criminal or civil asset forfeiture proceedings or in satisfaction of any civil money penalty imposed by any agency without further executive or legislative action.
Wordy.
Basically, it means we're only buying more BTC. We're not going to buy more digital assets. That's roughly what that means.
And yeah, it'll only arrive in case they go and seize more of it.
Seize mass digital assets. That's literally where my highlighting stopped because I was good. I was like, they get it. They got the most important important parts of Bitcoin. 2 different buckets. Bitcoin 1, digital asset 1. They have 30 days to figure out how much we have in the government. And they've said, you know what? If we're going to buy any more of something, we're only going to buy more Bitcoin, but it's got to either be budget neutral and it can't add more burden to the taxpayer.
Yeah. Because in section D onwards, it started to get a little dense and fancy.
There's a lot of subsections.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, our good buddy Greg, who's hanging out at the government right now, having to do these things, right? In subsection D, all the way down, it does say, subsection E, it says within 60 days. Ooh, a little bit more time.
But Greg doesn't get 60 days. The Secretary of the Treasury. I would say Treasury Secretary.
Well, wait. Well, where's the 30
60 days.
Where's the 30 days for the other? It's all the
Secretary. No. They have 30 days to go find it. And the Treasury Secretary has 60 days to deliver an evaluation of the legal and investment considerations, blah, 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 blah. So I think it sounds like the Treasury Secretary has 60 days to write their report. Everyone else has 30 days to go account everything.
Got it. So the Gregs go out into the world. They figure out how much Bitcoin we got, how many digital assets we've got. Boom, 30 days a hit. They deliver that to the Secretary of the Treasury, and it's like, all right, you got 30 extra days to figure out what the hell you're going to do with this stuff and how you're going to manage it.
Yep.
Well, Godspeed. United States government, folks.
In case anybody out there works for the government and they're confused on the storage of Bitcoin, our 4th episode should help you out.
But at least from my vantage point, I thought that those were the most significant pieces of the roughly 2.5 pages of the executive order.
Yeah, it was fun to read. I liked it too from a girl's perspective. Girls.
Why?
Or not girls. Anyone. What am I talking about? It looked like what I thought it would look like.
Yes.
You know? The font. The font and the kind of spotty nature and like the way it's bolded and the way it's written out. And then there's those like random things of like, as hereby stated in HSC USC 79705, whatever. And you're like the things that you don't understand that you could just so get lost in. And it has now subsections and A's and italics. So I was delighted by the presentation.
Great job.
For my
Whoever
first
created
EO
this
read,
thing.
it lived up to the hype. And it's a mix of sans serif and serif.
So
Impressive.
we have these 2.5 pages. For the layman, for the person new to Bitcoin, the takeaway is literally prior to March 6th, it was kind of an unknown on if at least the U.S. was going to recognize this as a significant artifact.
Mm-hmm.
And even per our last episode, this question of when does something stop being a speculative asset? It is not. No one else has said this. This is just Taylor's opinion.
Go, Taylor.
But I know that's where I think this is one of those things.
Yeah.
That is stepping in the direction of this is why it's no longer speculative. Like we've
now strategic.
It's now strategic. It's along the lines of oil and lithium and all the other things that we do. But I think this is just one of those things where if you are wavering or if you're looking for things to give you higher conviction, these would be one of those pieces. Now, we didn't prepare for this, but I'm just curious.
Okay.
We got to take the objective view. Why might this be bad? What if you're a Bitcoiner? Let's think back into all the podcast episodes we've ever listened. Why would a Bitcoiner maybe not be excited about this?
Well, I think at first glance or first instinct is the government as the big word and the Bitcoin community. Haven't really been friends. I would say that most of the Bitcoin community, I feel like you're like government buying a lot of Bitcoin.
Well, the overall thesis of Bitcoin was kind of against government or against a central authority in a way, because it's like, hey, you central authorities with a printing press, you haven't been doing a good job of...
I'll say it more eloquently.
Okay.
Bitcoin sought out to fix perhaps the fiscal issues that the government maybe laid the groundwork for.
Yes.
So I think that if I was a Bitcoin diehard and I saw that the government was pursuing Bitcoin as a strategic asset, perhaps you're worried about history repeating itself in some way.
I think you're right. There's sort of this like...
That is a
better
way to say it as opposed to...
I think it's fair because you're going like, if you've been on the bandwagon for any number of years on the Bitcoin side, there's sort of part of the culture of it that you kind of have to sign up for, which is like the government has not, or a central authority has not done a good job of managing the money, right? And so it's a little bit weird when your world gets rocked with like, but all of a sudden that government recognizes you. And you're like, I'm popular now? Like, and you're like, do I feel okay about being popular? So there's a little bit of hypocrisy in it because... In some ways, to be a Bitcoiner is to be anti-government. It is to be anti-central authority. But then at the same time, it's a pretty significant moment when the largest government and strongest government on planet Earth recognizes it. So that part, I agree with you. I think culturally, it's going to take some getting used to. I think the other part is, and this is for the, the conspiracy theory side on the Bitcoin side of things. So let's say you are a Bitcoiner. One of the things that you would have heard in the community is like, Bitcoin doesn't need anything from anybody else. Like, it's doing just fine. It's spread across thousands of nodes. It's just going to keep doing its thing, and it's going to keep growing in value because people are going to realize that sound money is pretty important. So the moment you inject the 800-pound gorilla called the government, and the government is now like with a microscope looking at your thing, it's what level of impact might the government be able to play with here. And so what we've talked about in different episodes from a technology perspective is, could the government ever do like a 51% attack and actually like dictate the code future of Bitcoin? Like, maybe it'd still be really hard. I think where us as United States citizens, where things can come into play is like if there's policy put down that would ever impact our ability to really get the most out of Bitcoin, like what you and I would expect. Okay. So I'm going to put us in full conspiracy theory mode.
Okay.
Conspiracy theory. Bitcoin continues to gain fiscal dominance. And also as a result of the debt spiral that we've covered in previous episodes, the U.S. dollar is in real trouble. And the U.S. government goes, holy moly, like Bitcoin really is competing with us as like what might need to be like the base layer money for the world, if not the U.S. moving forward. And that's threatening, right? So what might the government be able to do? They may not be able. How might they? They can't necessarily screw with the code, but you and I are beholden to more than just some code that exists in a computer somewhere. We're beholden to entities like state governments, like the IRS, federal tax code, things like that. So there could be a world where it's like, I'm making this up a little bit. In a world, what if the government made it illegal to own or self-custody Bitcoin? They said, oh, that thing that you've been saying is super valuable and you've held in your portfolio, you're no longer allowed to own it. And so a part of you wants to go, well, that could never happen. And as much as you want to say that, it has. So back in the early 1930s,
Okay.
this is during Great Depression time. This was actually Executive Order 6102, signed by Franklin D. Roosevelt on April 5th, 1933. What it did, it required U.S. citizens to turn in most of their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper currency. Why it was issued. Part of the efforts to combat the Great Depression by preventing gold hoarding and allowing the government more flexibility to increase the money supply. Penalty for noncompliance, fines up to $10,000, a huge amount at the time, and or up to 10 years in prison. There were exceptions. It said certain gold coins with collector value in small amounts for industrial or artistic use was fine. Let's see. This order was followed by the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 a year later, which officially took the U.S. off the gold standard for domestic transactions and devalued the dollar. Private ownership of gold bullion remained restricted until 1974. That's a long time.
Wow.
When President Gerald Ford signed legislation legalizing private gold ownership again. So as much as I want to say it's a conspiracy theory, it's happened before. Sound money that existed. The government basically said,
as a strategic asset.
They said, Sheboygan, we need to make this. So, and part of it was, right, because if I'm holding on to this thing called gold and it's going up in value, they basically said, nope, come give us your gold. And what was worse is we can actually choose how much paper money to give you. And I forget what it was at the time, but it wasn't the full value. Let's say it was worth $1 an ounce. It was way more than that, but it was like, we're only going to give you 70 cents an ounce. And so it allowed them to take back the strong money, and then they were able to print, right? And then sort of repeg dollar and gold together. So if I was a Bitcoiner, I'm going, do I want the 800-pound gorilla looking at what we fundamentally believe to be the best money that's ever existed? Because through executive orders and other things, there could be legislation that's put in place that says it's not legal for you to own Bitcoin. That's pretty crazy.
That is pretty crazy, because we've talked about how if you have your Bitcoin on cold storage, you can take it with
anywhere.
you.
Yep.
But this example is yes, but to maybe, this is all hypotheticals, but then it would be affecting, like, you can't live here. You can access it somewhere else.
Right.
But there are consequences of using it or having it in here. That's you know what I love about that is, this is kind of a sidestep, quick anecdote. I try and lead with empathy as much as I can, because everyone's going through something, and there's no way anyone, even your spouse, can really have the entire picture of what's going on in your mind. So if you're having a moment, there's a lot playing in that moment. Try and give that person the benefit of the doubt. But the big picture is nigh impossible to swallow of someone's life or this. And I think every time you bring up something that's like, well, we can sit here with, obviously, we're here with conviction, and we're passionate about talking about it. And we are passionate about looking at both sides. Yes. This is such a long form conversation, and it will continue to evolve and change, because even just little notions like that, you're like, I didn't think about that. And that's what I like about it.
I think even
Continues to push us.
well, even in that scenario,
Mm-hmm.
and again, in some ways conspiracy theory, but we do have historical precedent where it's occurred before. I think the part that it wouldn't necessarily change our current conviction
Mm-hmm.
around something like Bitcoin or investing in it, because if the government got to that point in time, it means we were right.
That's true.
It means like
That's true.
we actually found a better, more sound money.
Yeah.
And it was purely their need
Good
to
point.
like reinstill their control. So it's not as though, like, let's even say 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future, we knew that was going to happen. You're assuming that Bitcoin only reaches more cultural dominance. It increases in value over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't stop you from continuing to invest. So that's the part. It's like, right, it's that trade-off. It's like,
That's a good point.
So I think, again, back to the question of like objectively looking at this and what are the other pieces that aren't so, might not be so good about it. You have to roll with the punches and know that the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Ooh,
so even for you
okay.
and I, right? It's like, I'm sitting here and I'm like, holy fucking shit. I know, but they said, this
now I
is
have to mark on YouTube that there's swearing in this book.
unless you can like bleep, 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 bleep it out. The government just said this is a strategic reserve asset.
Mm-hmm.
Huge. But the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Mm.
I think the truth is more along the lines of it is. They recognize it as a pretty significant form of money. And could it be significant? Yeah, maybe. But I think that time horizon is so far out that this is not like, oh, because it's now a strategic reserve asset. In 6 days, or in 6 days, we're going to see this thing be $1 million. Like, no, that's not what this is. I think this is a really healthy step in the direction of like, we probably got it right. It probably is really sound money. And they're now seeing that too. And they want to play their hand to see how it goes. And so what I mean by it being somewhere in the middle, maybe there's a world between where both fiat and Bitcoin could exist together. Maybe there's a world where, as a part of this debt spiral, maybe by investing in Bitcoin, there is a way to help ourselves out of the debt by investing in a greater store of value, but fiat still exists for day-to-day transactions and things like that. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle.
I love that.
Well, at least we've done a little bit of objective overview of, for those that may not be super excited about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, I can try and see both sides. That's all I had.
Yeah, I don't know. I really like the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think my closing statement will be like I said in one other episode, like I really like history, and this feels like one of those moments that we're watching it unfold. It's a really big, even though you're right, it's not legislation, but it is a declaration to say that this is something that has value, and it was set on a world stage, and that the U.S. wants to be the national leader in it. That's a pretty big historic pivot.
Well, back to your 800-pound gorilla comment. So let's now flip side back to the positive. So if you are China, Russia, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, Japan, if you are a major player and the 800-pound gorilla said, I'm deeming this thing strategic and I'm going to start collecting a bunch of it, you don't have a choice. You have to move as well. So I think that's the other part that might be interesting to see what plays out this year is the other inevitable country dominoes that will fall over. It's also possible that they've already been collecting Bitcoin and they just haven't made a stage of it with an executive order like this. But I think that's the other part to like, let's see what steps 2 and 3 look like here. It'll be really interesting 30 to 60 days from now. What does the Secretary of Treasury say about this stuff? Like maybe that'll be an interesting episode. What's the plan? But I think to see other countries respond in kind, it's going to be a very fascinating 2025 with this.
Is this too philosophical to say that if other countries start to adopt their own Bitcoin strategy, does that kind of align with the thesis of Bitcoin being a global asset that starts to balance the tables?
I think so.
Yeah, right? Because I love like seeing, we'll get into the energy side of Bitcoin, I think, coming up soon. But a lot of the mining side of Bitcoin favors moving the mining of Bitcoin into remote areas of the world,
Right.
so that it's more evenly distributed. And so it kind of plays into the thesis of it being something that's global. So, a lot of times I think it could feel like, oh, well, they're going to get a bunch. It's like the idea is for it to unify the system as opposed to keeping it, what do you call that? Chunked. That's the wrong word.
Well, to keep it unfairly distributed, like,
Yeah.
right, if there were like only like large deposits in certain areas, I think, which we've not really directly talked about before, but getting back into part of our philosophical conversation of what is money,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, my stance on this side of the podcast room is we agree that the market has deemed it viable,
Mm-hmm.
especially double stamp by the U.S. government, and that there's already been shown utility of it already acts and behaves as money. So we've proven both speculative value and utility. Ipso facto, you have something of value. So what happens, to your point, if large entities start to put quite a few of their assets inside of Bitcoin, does that also make it then a very viable option for not just being a strategic reserve asset, but the artifact through which the globe starts to transact in more significant ways? So making up small things, but like right now, right? If
a vehicle of exchange.
So right now, oil prices,
Mhm.
right? So how if I'm Sweden versus Canada versus the Philippines, how does the globe know what a barrel of oil costs? And it's because of right now the denomination for a barrel of oil, it's agreed globally, is the US dollar. So everyone knows exactly how much it costs because that's our chosen value metric for a barrel of oil. So it could be interesting is if, again, to your point, if there's greater accessibility to this type of money, and we all agree it to be a strategic store of value, could there then be a greater use case for it playing out on the larger government side of things? So who knows?
Who knows? But EO 14233 has set some things in motion.
I love how you're calling it EO. Is that from Matthew Pines? Did he call it EO?
Probably.
I love it. Yeah, because I'm like executive order. Man, you're
are you
like
kidding?
ahead of the game.
I did my research.
Hey, shout out to American Hodl, Matthew Pines, and to Danny Knowles of What Bitcoin Did podcast. We listened to that in the car. I don't know, a couple weekends ago on a drive, and it was glorious.
I listened to it again today. I probably understood 3.5%, but I'm on my way.
Well, we should link that episode in the show notes.
Yeah, see how
Give some
much you
extra love.
understand. Test yourself.
Okay. Also, it's great exposure.
Reach goals.
If you are listening to this Bitcoin podcast, like there are some other great ones out there as well. Like we'll link this one, and they can
We
can
are
take a
what
listen.
Bitcoin did.
Super
diehards.
fans. I know. One day we hope to meet some of these folks. It'd be so cool. Okay.
Okay, bye.
Well, that's not it. Well, thanks for listening.
Oh,
First and foremost,
thanks.
thanks for listening in on why a strategic Bitcoin reserve is so cool and important. Thanks for listening to us struggle through reading government documentation. And
EOS number
EOS.
14.
And yes, feel free, leave a comment, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, on other key topics around Bitcoin that you find yourself fascinated by. We are going to be we got a special request to do an episode on taxation. So we're definitely going to do that. We know we got hit on energy and a bunch of other stuff. But if you have an idea, let us know what your thought is. But that's it. Until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.